In the gallery of monsters of the Third Reich, there are figures whose cruelty was predictable, but there are also those whose path from ordinariness to absolute evil arouses a special, chilling interest. Josef Sepp Dietrich is the most striking example of the latter. His story begins not in the headquarters of the Wehrmacht or in the halls of party congresses, but at the very doorstep of Adolf Hitler. As one of his first associates, the former butcher and street fighter won the Führer's absolute trust, becoming his personal driver and bodyguard. In this role, Dietrich was Hitler's shadow, a man whose main task was to protect one single life. However, it was from this personal loyalty, like a poisonous seed, that one of Nazi Germany's most notorious military machines grew. The Führer's personal guard, the SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, under Dietrich's command, first became an elite regiment and then an entire tank army. And here, the defender turned into an executioner. The name of Sepp Dietrich and his Leibstandarte is forever inscribed in the history of the most horrific war crimes of World War II. His soldiers, fanatically loyal to their commander as he was loyal to Hitler, left a bloody trail on the battlefields from Kharkiv to the Ardennes. The Malmedy massacre, where American prisoners of war were cold-bloodedly shot, became an ominous symbol of the ruthlessness that Dietrich not only allowed but encouraged. Dietrich is a paradoxical figure. He was neither a brilliant strategist like Manstein nor an ideological architect like Himmler. He was a simple, rough, and straightforward executor whose dogged loyalty proved more terrifying than the sophisticated cruelty of many other Nazi leaders. How did a man whose job was to save lives become a commander for whom other people's lives were worthless? This question makes his biography more than just a story about one of the SS generals. It is a frightening study of how absolute loyalty to one person can turn a guard into a mass murderer and a faithful dog into a chained monster of the regime.
Childhood, youth, profession. To understand the essence of Sepp Dietrich, one must return to the Bavarian countryside of the late 19th century, to a simple, almost peasant environment that shaped people who were rough, strong, and not inclined to reflection. He was born on May 28, 1892, in the village of Hawangen, near Memmingen, into the family of a storekeeper. His world was limited to fields, a cattle yard, and a local tavern, a world where physical strength was valued over intellectual grace. Dietrich's formal education was minimal. Life taught him lessons through hard work. From an early age, he changed several professions, from a coachman's apprentice to a farm worker, until he found a craft that seemed to perfectly match his character and physique, the profession of a butcher. The huge hands of the butcher Zepp, which once chopped up carcasses, now controlled the fate of hundreds of soldiers. This metaphor is not just a literary image, but the key to understanding his personality. His work as a butcher had accustomed him to the sight of blood, to the cold-blooded cutting of flesh, to a process where life is transformed into soulless material. It shaped him into a pragmatic cruelty and lack of squeamishness, qualities that would later define him as an SS commander. He was a man of the earth, with a simple and strong character, who looked at the world without sentimentality. The First World War tore Dietrich from his familiar Bavarian routine and threw him into the crucible that finally forged his character. In 1911, he enlisted in the Bavarian army and found himself on the front lines when the war began. He went through the hell of trench warfare, served in the artillery, was awarded the Iron Cross for bravery, and rose to the rank of non-commissioned officer. At the end of the war, he became one of the first German tankers, a member of the crew of one of the few tanks in the Kaiser's army. The war became his real university. It taught him to obey, to command, to survive, and most importantly, to kill without hesitation. Returning from the war to the humiliated and chaotic Weimar Republic, the butcher and soldier Sepp Dietrich could no longer and did not want to return to peaceful life. His brute strength and ruthlessness acquired at the front sought a new application, and he soon found it in the turbulent political battles of the nascent Nazi movement.
Hitler's accidental bodyguard. Germany's defeat in World War I left millions of people like Sepp Dietrich,
Soldiers who knew no other trade but war and saw no place for themselves in a humiliated civilian society on the margins of life. After demobilization, he drifted from one odd job to another, which only emphasized his instability. He was an officer in the Bavarian State Police, a customs officer, and even a gas station attendant. He never stayed anywhere for long. All this jumble of professions was only a backdrop for his true calling, which he found when he joined the NSDAP in 1928. In a party environment teeming with demagogues, schemers, and novice ideologues, Dietrich was an anomaly. He had no talent for public speaking, did not understand the intricacies of politics, and did not seek power in the traditional sense. But he possessed what Adolf Hitler, who was constantly afraid of conspiracies and betrayal, valued above all else: indomitable physical strength, straightforwardness, and a complete lack of political ambition. Hitler did not need another ally, competitor. He needed a loyal dog, and he found him in Dietrich. Thus, almost by accident, the former butcher became one of the people closest to the Führer, his personal driver and bodyguard. Their relationship was simple and straightforward. Dietrich did not offer advice, he simply followed orders. His rough manners and Bavarian dialect amused Hitler, and his imposing figure served as a living shield during countless trips around Germany. Dietrich treated the Führer's security as a purely personal matter, rather than a state structure. He personally selected the first fighters for the unit that would later become the SS Leibstandarte. The main selection criterion was not professional training, but absolute, unconditional, fanatical loyalty to Hitler personally. He was not creating a security service, but a clan of bodyguards bound by an oath of allegiance to their leader. It was during this period that his philosophy was formed, which he would later instill in thousands of his soldiers. It was a philosophy of superiority, contempt for weakness, and complete devaluation of human life outside their narrow circle. He did not need complex ideological constructs to justify cruelty. His worldview was as simple as a punch. Later, already a general, he would formulate this principle with soldierly directness. "Human life has little value for the SS," Dietrich said, according to eyewitness accounts. This phrase sums him up: a butcher for whom flesh is just material, and a bodyguard for whom only one life is valuable, while all others are nothing more than a potential threat or an annoying obstacle.
Career in the SS and NSDAP. Joining the NSDAP and SS in 1928 became a springboard for Sepp Dietrich. His career rise was dizzying and, at first glance, illogical for a man without education or political talent. However, other qualities were valued in the hierarchy of the Third Reich. In just a few years, he rose from Sturmbannführer to Gruppenführer of the SS, equivalent to lieutenant general, and in 1930 he became a member of the Reichstag from Lower Bavaria. Of course, his role in parliament was purely decorative. Dietrich was not a man of words, he was a man of action. Outside the party offices, he was in his element. Rough, loud, with a primitive but infectious sense of humor, he became the life of the party for others like him, the old fighters. His passion for boxing and fencing was not just a hobby, but a continuation of his nature. He valued direct, brutal combat, where the strongest prevailed. It was this primitive energy and absolute loyalty that made him indispensable in Hitler's eyes. He was the living embodiment of the SS ideal, physically strong, ideologically simple, and ready to carry out any order without hesitation.
Role in the Night of the Long Knives. Dietrich's loyalty was put to the ultimate test in the bloody fog of June 30, 1934. The Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler decided to destroy the leadership of the SA stormtroopers headed by his old comrade Ernst Röhm, became a turning point for the entire Nazi regime. The SA, formerly the party's main striking force, had become too independent and posed a threat to the Führer's power. It was Sepp Dietrich and his Leibstandarte who were entrusted with one of the dirtiest tasks. Receiving a personal order from Hitler, Dietrich and his unit arrived at Stadelheim prison where the arrested SA leaders were being held. Without trial, without investigation, without the slightest hesitation, he personally supervised the execution of his former party comrades. This act of cold-blooded slaughter forever cemented his status as a loyal executor, a man whose loyalty to the Führer was above any laws, concepts of honor, and even old friendships. He proved that he was ready to pull the trigger if his leader's will demanded it. A reliable rumor, behind this mask of an indestructible performer, some contemporaries claimed, lay a deeply rooted fear. Some believed that his ruthlessness was fueled by personal fear. The purges he had lived through showed him that even the most high-ranking figures could be wiped out in an instant. Perhaps his demonstrative cruelty was not only a manifestation of loyalty, but also a desperate attempt to prove his indispensability and secure his position in a world where yesterday's hero could find himself facing a firing squad today.
Military campaigns and cruelty. When World War II broke out, Sepp Dietrich finally found himself in his true element. His Leibstandarte, once a ceremonial regiment, became one of the most combat-ready but also one of the most brutal units of the Waffen-SS. After fighting in Poland, France, the Balkans, and Greece, Dietrich and his men were hardened in battle, demonstrating iron discipline and fanatical courage. His leadership qualities and his ruthlessness were particularly evident on the Eastern Front, where he commanded an SS tank corps. His troops were ruled by brutal discipline. Dietrich showed no mercy to either his own men or his enemies. He despised weakness and cowardice, demanding complete self-sacrifice from his soldiers. But if he was harsh with his own men, he was merciless with his enemies. His troops were involved in numerous crimes: the execution of prisoners, the destruction of villages, and the massacre of partisans and civilians. Dietrich saw nothing wrong with this. For him, as a former butcher, war was just a job, bloody, dirty, but necessary. He did not burden himself with moral qualms, fully accepting the Nazi doctrine of the racial inferiority of the enemy. Dietrich claimed that war is a place for men where morality does not apply. In his primitive worldview, the battlefield was an arena where the strongest survived, and humanism was an unaffordable luxury that led to defeat. This philosophy, which permeated his Leibstandarte to its very core, inevitably led to the tragedy that forever tarnished his name.
The Battle of the Bulge, the Malmedy Massacre. In the winter of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge was the culmination and symbol of the brutality that reigned in Dietrich's troops. It was Hitler's last desperate attempt to turn the tide of war in the West. The 6th SS Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich, was assigned a key role in the offensive. He gave his officers a clear task: to break through at any cost, without being distracted by prisoners, spreading fear and panic. On December 17, 1944, at an intersection near the Belgian town of Malmedy, the advanced guard of the Leibstandarte, the Piper Combat Group, encountered an American observation artillery battalion. The Americans, caught off guard, were quickly surrounded and surrendered. What happened next became one of the most notorious war crimes on the Western Front. More than 80 unarmed American prisoners of war were herded into a field and cold-bloodedly shot with machine guns. Although Dietrich did not give a direct order to shoot them, the Malmedy massacre was the logical outcome of the culture of absolute ruthlessness that he had cultivated in his troops for years. His soldiers were simply following their commander's orders to advance without being burdened by humanism. Early in the morning, the snow absorbed the blood of American soldiers, and the heavy rock of the SS hung over the clearing. The names of the dead became whispers, hidden in the shadows of winter. This tragedy went down in history as a symbol of the atrocities committed by the Waffen-SS and became the main charge against Sepp Dietrich at the post-war tribunal.
Trial and imprisonment. The collapse of the Third Reich meant the end for its leaders, but for Sepp Dietrich it was only the beginning of a long journey through courtrooms and prison cells. As one of the highest-ranking SS officers and commander of the army responsible for the Malmedy massacre, he was one of the main targets of Allied justice. In July 1946, at the U.S. military tribunal in Dachau, the very place where the Nazis had committed their atrocities, Dietrich was found guilty of war crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, in the realities of the beginning of the Cold War, many sentences against Nazi criminals were revised. Dietrich's sentence was reduced to 25 years, and in 1955, after serving less than 10 years, he was released. But the illusion of freedom was short-lived. The authorities of the new West Germany needed to demonstrate that they themselves were capable of judging the criminals of the past, and they found a new charge for Dietrich. Little-known fact. In 1957, Sepp Dietrich stood trial again, but this time before a German court. He was not tried for war crimes, but for his role in the Night of the Long Knives in 1934, for his participation in the murder of the left wing of the NSDAP. Justice, albeit a quarter of a century late, caught up with him for a crime that had once strengthened his position. This trial symbolically brought his bloody career, which began with political assassinations, full circle. He was sentenced to 19 months in prison, but was soon released on health grounds.
Final years. When he was finally released, Sepp Dietrich was no longer a formidable commander, but a sick, aging man. He settled in Ludwigsburg and remained an active member of the Mutual Aid Organization of former SS troops, HIAG, until the end of his life, where he enjoyed unquestionable authority. Time and prison did not change his convictions. He remained a fanatical, unrepentant supporter of Nazism, believing until his last breath in the righteousness of the cause he served. He denied his personal guilt in war crimes, considering himself a soldier who was only doing his duty. He never understood, or did not want to understand, the full horror of the regime he so loyally served. In his simple, soldier's worldview, there was no room for remorse. For him, everything was crystal clear. He had one unchanging answer to all accusations, which became his epitaph: "I did it for Germany and the Führer." Sepp Dietrich died of a heart attack on April 21, 1966. Thousands of former colleagues gathered at his funeral to pay their last respects to their commander. The bodyguard who became an executioner passed away, remaining captive to his blind loyalty, which turned him from a simple butcher into one of the most sinister instruments of the Nazi machine of destruction.